Ladies, gentlemen, good evening to you all, and welcome to this presentation of the review that has been independently conducted by Helios and me and a gentleman called Graham Lake. I'll come back to that a little bit later. I also like to welcome all of you that is following us on the webcast. So be aware that there is transmitted over internet what we're going to say here. There will be no pictures of you in that webcast. It will be of us up front and the presentation. So none of your faces will appear on that particular webcast. I'd like to say a few words about the international nature of aviation and the fact that that provides such a fantastic opportunities to travel. The unfortunate thing with aircraft is that they do generate a little bit of noise. And that's why we have been trying to sort of look into what things could be done better. But because of the international air transport system works so well, is because we have a lot of regulations in the format of global provision and actually laws which all ICAO members, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, need to comply with. And that's why procedures need to be international compatible and in particular safe. We have all concerned parties represented here or on the web. So NAV Canada is listening into this, Transport Canada, GTAA, airlines, noise complaints groups, politicians, and also individuals that are simply concerned about the situation in their own neighborhood or traffic over their own backyards. A few practical things for you is that we would like mobiles in silent mode, so we are not... You cannot hear me? I hear myself in the loudspeaker anyway, so I don't know if there's something down there. Is it better now, or? I try to speak loud as well, so they don't have to cramp up the amplification too much, so we get a strange background noise. But I'd like to beg you to put the mobiles to silent. The review team consists basically of three individuals. Nick Bold, which is the principal program manager for this activity from Helios, which did get the contract, and two connected individuals with long ATM experience, which is myself. My name is Bo Redeborn, and a gentleman that worked with me at Gatwick for a similar activity addressing only arrivals called Graham Lake. So the three of us are entirely responsible for the content of the report that we will present tonight. We've done this as an independent way, consulting most of you that are represented here in one way or another. At least we've been giving you the opportunity. We've been visiting a lot of complaints group. We have organizing meetings, try to understand the nature of the problem. We will make a presentation, Nick will do, of the report in a few minutes. And I like to state that you will receive printed copies as you go out of the report. So this is the official release of the printed report, and we will ensure that tomorrow morning when you wake up, you can also download electronic copies of the report from the website. Questions on what we say will be taken after the presentation is finished. That will start roughly after 45-50 minutes. So we will have plenty of time to address your questions on this and any other kind of things. You also see there that press and media could, if they like, contact us directly on info@askhelios.com. And after today, if you have a question to us that you forgot to raise tonight, or you felt you didn't get an appropriate answer to, you can actually address this to the Toronto Airspace review at askhelios.com, which has been around for the entire period we've done this particular review. So after today's question, at email to Toronto Airspace review at askhelios.com. Now, I'd like to invite NAV Canada in the form of Rudy Keller to make an introductory remarks on the reason for this review and say a few words how they intend to handle this review now when we actually give it in the hands of NAV Canada, which have actually asked us to do this review. So please, Rudy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Boo. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Rudy Keller, and I do have a title and a contact details. That's not omitted intentionally. I'm the Executive Vice President of Service Delivery, and on behalf of all the NAV Canada employees across the country, and in particular in the Toronto Flight Information Region, I just want to make some opening remarks with respect to the review that we're going to all hear about in the coming minutes. NAV Canada decided just over a year ago to retain an independent party to listen to community issues, review the airspace, and look at things that could be done differently to reduce noise and impact of aircraft operation. That decision was not made lightly. That was not our normal way of doing business, but based on the feedback, we feel strongly that we need to look outside and get some independent advice as to how we were doing things. I know it's been a long process for many of the residents here tonight, as it has been for NAV Canada, but having said that, I think it has been an important process, one that will give us a chance to receive some feedback, good or bad, independently from someone of an arm's length review. And it's a stepping stone, I would say, for more to come from NAV Canada. Aviation activity has both a positive and negative impacts on the communities it serves. We realize that changes made to flight paths can often result in negative impacts resulting from aircraft noise. NAV Canada remains committed as we go forward to do all we can to minimize these impacts. I look forward to receiving and hearing the review recommendations tonight. Along with the rest of you, it will be new for us to receive the report when we leave here. And as this is an independent review that is being released tonight, of course, I'm not in a position to make any specific comments immediately. However, I do commit on behalf of NAV Canada that we will be listening to the recommendations, considering the recommendations, and reviewing them in more detail in weeks to come. Furthermore, I can commit that we will release publicly a response to the independent Toronto Airspace Review within 60 days that addresses all recommendations. And lastly, I want to thank Nick Bood of Helios, Boo, Redbourne, and Graham Lake for their work over the past year and for the considerable experience in aviation and aviation noise issues at airports around the world that they have brought to this process and our operations within the Toronto area. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. Now we comes to the meat of the evening, the report which will be released. And Nick will take you through this in roughly 42, 43 minutes, according to the rehearsal. So after that, I will open up the floor for comments and questions on everything that we have been doing and how you receive the stuff that we are recommending. The floor is yours, Nick.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming. Thank you, Boo, for the introduction. Okay, I'm going to step through quite a few slides. We're going to cover all of the recommendations that we cover in the review. There is a lot more detail in the report. A lot of the justification is detailed in the report. It is 181 pages long, nearly 50,000 words, 72 figures. It has been reviewed by people who know nothing about aviation, and they have managed to understand it. So hopefully Everybody here will be able to read the report. It is not a short read, but it is a comprehensive report. So, as we said, you will get a copy on your way out. If I could just ask if you could take one per household. We've had a number printed. I just don't want to run out. Based on the fact that there's still a lot of empty seats in the room, which is a complete surprise to us, because we have filled all the tickets for this. There will be plenty of copies tonight. So, first of all, Helios's ongoing projects in Toronto. Just to get it clear from the beginning, we are involved in 3 pieces of work at the moment. One, the independent review for NAV Canada, the box in green. That is what we are talking about tonight. Then, earlier this year, we won an opportunity, a competitive opportunity to work with the GTAA, where we are doing number crunching, detailed modelling of noise contours to help the GTA understand the feasibility of summer weekend runway alternation. The GTAA are leading on that, and we are providing technical support services. Okay, is that any better? Okay, apologies guys. So as I was saying, the work on the summer weekend runway alternation, Helios providing technical support to the GTA. We are not leading that feasibility study. A third piece of work that we have delivered as a draft report to the GTA has been looking at best practice with noise management programs at different international airports. That draft report is with the GTAA and will be shared shortly, but it's not part of this evening. This evening we are just concentrating on the airspace review. Okay, moving on to the review itself and the recommendations. I'm going to do an introduction and approach because a number of people here haven't been to some of the consultation meetings over the past year, so I'm just going to cover the background as to what the review is about, what the scope was, what the objectives are, some of the key complaints that were highlighted to us back in November last year from the communities, and how we can address and move forwards in mitigating noise. So, first of all, an introduction to Toronto Pearson. Hopefully it doesn't need any introduction, but it is operated by the GTA. They have a 60-year lease to the operation, which they're in their 21st year. It has 5 runways, but each of those physical strips of tarmac has 2 ends. So if you hear people say it has 10 runways, that's because each runway has 2 ends. It's the 15th busiest airport in the world in terms of the number of aircraft arriving and departing. So it is a major international airport, and it's the busiest airport in Canada. Last year, they processed more than 44 million passengers and over 450,000 flight movements. And NAV Canada provides the air traffic control and the airspace management for the operation of the airspace in the whole of Canada, but therefore the airspace and operation here at Toronto. I'm just going to cover a few technical terms, and I've tried to keep as much jargon out of this presentation as I can, but there are sort of 3 terms that will be used through the presentation. I just want to make sure that people are aware. The first one is the downwind. Aircraft on approach to Toronto, a number of them will join the downwind and they fly past the airport up to the top, where at some point by air traffic control instruct them to complete their base leg. This varies where it is because air traffic control are mixing aircraft from different directions to try and get them in a sequence and spacing that is safe for landing. So this base leg moves in and out depending on other traffic, but they do a 180-degree base leg and then they fly the final approach straight in to the runway. That is as technical as it's going to get in the presentation. There is a lot more jargon in the report, but it is all explained in there. So, Rudy touched on it, but why an independent airspace review? Well, background, NAV Canada made a change to the airspace around Toronto in February 2012. That was part of a much wider airspace change that stretched from Windsor through Toronto up to Montreal. But whilst that was predominantly at much higher altitude, there were some local changes here as part of the requirement to periodically review all flight paths and make sure that they're fit for purpose. And so from that, we've understood through our work and engagement in the communities that the NAV Canada and GTAA had come up with 6 initiatives to try and mitigate noise in the summer of 2015. And what we heard was they aren't sufficient. They're not going to make a significant impact. So again, we were being told this as well when we were bidding for the work. And then NAV Canada, as Rudy said, this is a new step for them. They realised they needed to do something different to try and move the issue on, to try and find a way to progress things and make sure that everything that could be done is being done. So I'll now talk you through the 2012 airspace change, or the key element that caused most of the complaints in Toronto. And through the diagrams, all of the diagrams concentrate on one particular direction. That does not mean that is the only area that we've looked at. It is just to keep a single image up that you can look at through each slide. What applies in one direction applies in other directions as well. So in 2012, the airspace change here moved the south downwind by 1 nautical mile. A nautical mile is nearly 2 kilometres. And that is between the blue and the green line, that it moved away from the airport slightly closer to the lake shore. That was to achieve compliance with the regulatory Canadian airspace design standards. A further regulation change that became mandatory in 2014 prevents NAV Canada seeking an exemption and returning back to the 2012 flight path. Pre-2012, NAV Canada had an exemption which had been granted in 2003. They can't go back now. There are good reasons as to why the move to 5 nautical miles has been required. We've looked at it. We've looked at other policies, not just the Canadian ones, the international ones, and we've concluded that this can't go back, but that then triggers our review as to what else can be done to reduce noise. And as it says on the slide there, unfortunately, the move that happened did put the aircraft over a much greater residential population, which previously didn't have that much aircraft noise. So the review, the objective of the review was to identify all reasonable actions to reduce aircraft noise disturbance and make sure that if they weren't being done, we are going to recommend them. So that was the objective. The scope, it was related to the airspace operation, the aircraft arriving and departing from Toronto Pearson. We weren't looking at the other airports in the area, just the airspace and the airspace operation associated with Toronto Pearson. And we set a sort of an upper bound just to try and constrain how wide we were going to look for flights below 8,000 foot. We haven't enforced this rigidly, but it was just the fact that the majority of noise complaints come from aircraft that are below 8,000 foot. So it was a guide for us just to give an idea of the boundary as to how far. We didn't want to get involved with people sort of saying a flight that is 300 miles from here at 30,000 foot is causing a problem. It was to keep it contained close in to the Greater Toronto area. So, what complaints did we hear from communities? A common one was the aircraft are too loud, too low, too often. And that we heard time and time again. And these are only a sample of the complaints that we heard, but these are sort of the key ones. Route efficiency before noise. Well, maybe not quite in those terms, but we heard that people were concerned that NAV Canada were always putting airlines' operational efficiency, the amount of fuel they're burning, all greenhouse gases they're emitting, because fuel burn equals greenhouse gases, making that more important than noise. That people felt that NAV Canada were not looking at the noise impact. A fairly clear complaint. Another statement was, use the lake more. You've got a huge body of water very nearby, which nobody lives on, or not maybe other than on the shore, that could be used. The A320 family wine. I'll come on to explain this in a moment, but it's a particular group of aircraft that on approach create a very annoying high-pitched whine. Somebody said to me earlier, I call it the scream. Whatever you call it, if you've heard it, you know about it. Another complaint was that NAV Canada didn't consult sufficiently in 2012. Our scope doesn't look backwards as to what was done. We're looking forwards to look for mitigations, but it was still brought up to us that that was a complaint. Another one was that flight paths are too concentrated. By too concentrated, people were saying that the aircraft no longer being spread over a wider lateral distance were much tighter packed into the centre of the main flight path line. We've done some analysis on this, and the detail is in the report. There has been a slight change within 150 metres either side of the centre line of a flight path. 150 metres either side, giving 300 metres in total. Whilst it is a slight change in concentration, the impact on the ground would be negligible. You wouldn't be able to distinguish the difference between an aircraft 150 metres either way. The fact that the aircraft have moved nearly 2 kilometres from where they were pre-2012, that you will most certainly see. So, conclusion, concentration has changed by a minor amount, but not enough to impact the noise heard on the ground. And as I said, the detail is in the report, and there are charts and analysis in there to show you the detail behind that. So that's what the complaints were, that's what the issues were. So how can we start to look for mitigations? ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization that sets the international standards that are used around the world to make sure that this is an international business and that aircraft and airlines from anywhere in the world are operating within a set standard framework. They also publish guidance, and one of the bits of guidance they published a number of years ago is what they call their balanced approach, which is acknowledging that yes, aircraft make noise, and there are 4 key elements you can look at to try and reduce that noise impact. The first one being reduction of noise at source. Make aircraft quieter. If we could make a silent aircraft, we wouldn't have a noise issue. It's as simple as that. If you can make the aircraft quieter, make the engines quieter, make the body of the aircraft smoother so as there's less wind noise as it rushes past it, you're reducing the production noise in the first place. It's the key thing here. Then the second one is land use planning. I try and make sure that you manage what is developed close to the airport. So where is okay for residential development, where do you put industrial development, trying to manage that and make sure that those involved in the planning know where the noise from the airport is going to be. Third one, noise abatement operational procedures. A bit of a mouthful, but that's the name given to it by ICAO. This is about, can you fly aircraft in a quieter fashion? Can you keep aircraft higher? Can you get them to fly in a manner where they are just using less engine power, putting out less flaps and brakes on the wings, which reduces the noise? So it's about trying to fly the aircraft in a quieter manner. And then finally, operating restrictions. Operating restrictions are things like the night period, where there's a limit on how many aircraft between midnight 30 and 6:30 in the morning. Restrictions on what type of aircraft can operate at different times of the evening and into the night. And up there, we've also shown the key bodies that influence each of these 4 impact areas. The 2 shown in blue are the 2 where we have concentrated, and that's where our recommendations are, because NAV Canada actually can only directly influence the noise abatement operational procedures, but we have made a recommendation in the area of reducing noise at source, which we'll come on to in a minute, around the A320 whine, because it is a significant reduction in noise. The other 2, NAV Canada has no accountability within land use planning or the operating restrictions. They may implement the operating restrictions when they've been set, but they do not set them in the first place. In looking at all the options we had before us, we needed some guiding principles about how we were going to weigh up the different options. Some of these were included in our terms of reference. Some of them have been developed as we have moved through this study. So the first one, not to compromise safety. none of us want aviation to become less safe. We either use it or we live underneath it or close to it. No compromise to safety. Not to reduce capacity. There is a growing demand. Toronto has seen growth over the last few years. We can't reduce capacity and curtail that demand. Prioritise reducing noise at source. So as I said just now, if you can make the aircraft quieter in the first place, that is the best thing you can do because that reduces the noise. So that's the main priority. If you can't reduce the noise at source, try and reduce how much of that noise gets down to the ground. Fairly self-explanatory. Then the fifth one, to identify opportunities for relief, i.e. opportunities to share some of that noise so as to give breaks in periods, short-term periods, a few hours a day of when noise can be moved. We identify those opportunities, but then moving on to the sixth one, we do not make a definitive judgment where there is a socio-political decision involved in it. We are a third party from outside of Canada. I cannot say whether sharing noise here is right. I can identify the options as to how it could be shared, but the actual decision has to be a local debate, which the GTAA has been leading this summer through their community engagement, and that will move on to the consultation on the summer weekend runway alternation. The seventh one here, avoid moving noise just to appease impacted communities. If you move noise from community A to community B for no reason other than to take it away from community A on a long-term basis, you haven't solved anything. You've actually made your situation a lot worse because newly impacted people are much more active and concerned about the noise than those who have become accustomed to it and accept it. So moving it just to appease one community is not a solution. We've looked to the future. There are some changes coming, some of them already beginning to be used elsewhere in the world in technology and the way the aviation industry runs. Those we believe can bring longer term solutions, and therefore we have looked to see what we can do longer term as well as in the shorter term. And then finally there, you are all fully aware that the US border is very close to here. Whilst there is good cooperation between NAV Canada and the FAA, changing things over that boundary takes time and negotiation. So we've had to be aware that there is a boundary there and NAV Canada only has a remit within Canadian airspace. So having set some guiding principles, we've also sort of identified strategic objectives which we believe NAV Canada should work towards achieving. And a lot of the recommendations we make support achieving these strategic objectives. So keeping aircraft as high as possible for as long as possible. That is about reducing the amount of noise that gets to the ground. If you can keep it higher, longer, less people will be impacted. Maximise the use of low power, low drag, continuous descent operations. We'll come on to talk about these in a bit more detail. Again, that is about reducing the quantity of noise that reaches the ground. Managing the flow of aircraft into the area. At the moment, the local operation is very tactical, i.e. it can peak and trough in the number of aircraft coming into the local Toronto area. Every few minutes, it can be a few minutes of peak and then it can drop off. And that is where the controllers at the moment are very tactically using their skill and capability to manage and sequence that flow and get aircraft down safely or depart safely through the airspace. If you can get that to the point where it is a smooth operation, has something happened with the mic here or? Okay, it's just suddenly changed the noise icon here. Sorry for that. If you can get a smooth flow, a predictable flow, then managing that operation in a more noise-sensitive way is a lot easier to do. So that is another objective, looking towards what is termed time-based operations, which we will talk about as we move through. And finally, a strategic objective which we believe would have an impact is looking at when should you prioritise noise over the fuel burn or the greenhouse gas emissions. Noise is obviously a problem when aircraft are lower. The impact of greenhouse gases is greater the higher the aircraft. Is there a strategic balance there as to when you prioritise one over the other? We've not made a recommendation on this, but we have set it as a strategic objective that NAV Canada should look at and think about as they move forwards with future airspace designs. So, the recommendations, probably the bit that people are saying, when's he going to get to the recommendations? Well, we are here now. The majority of the mitigations and recommendations that we're going to present relate to arrivals. There is a lot more you can do with an arrival aircraft in changing the way it impacts noise than you can with a departure. A departure has to use a certain amount of engine thrust to accelerate and climb. They are in a critical stage, and they've got to get high and fast because that's where they are then safe. But on the arrivals, as we'll see, there are many little areas we can work with. So on the departures, the one thing that we have looked at is there are two standard departure procedures that ICAO sets out. To put them simply, one says for the aircraft to climb as quickly as possible and then accelerate to gain the speed it needs, or the second one is the other way round. Accelerate the aircraft first, so climbing less steeply, and then when you've got a faster speed, then increase your climb gradient. These apply up to 3,000 foot. That's as they're set out. In Toronto, nowhere, you can't turn an aircraft until it is above 3,000 foot. That is sort of one of the operating procedures here. So therefore, these only apply in the straight departure element before aircraft start to be turned left or right away from the airport onto their en route flight path. The evidence we've got, and there are some noise contours included in the report, show that there is very little difference between procedure 1 or procedure 2. The impact is also very sensitive because the change is so small as to quite where the community is, how close it is to the airport, how offset it is left or right to the extended runway centre line. So therefore, we cannot make a recommendation as to whether the airport should operate procedure 1 or procedure 2. The difference would be, most communities would not be able to detect the difference between these, so therefore we don't feel it's right to make a recommendation for one or the other. Okay, making aircraft quieter. The A320 family of aircraft, A318, 319, 320 and 321. This is a common family of aircraft built by Airbus, and at the moment, or last year, 1 in 5 arrivals at Toronto Pearson was by one of these aircraft types. They make a whine because the air rushing underneath the wing goes over a hole, a bit like blowing over a bottle, and it's a high-pitched whine. If you can resolve that, which there is a relatively easy fix for, by attaching a small deflector shown in the bottom left picture there to the underside of the wing, it just disrupts the airflow, problem's gone. That can make a difference in noise between 4 and 11 decibels. What does that actually mean? 10 decibels is a half. If you can reduce noise by 10 decibels, it's half what the human ear hears. So if you've got any teenagers who like to have the music at level 20, if you can turn it to level 10, you have probably made a reduction of about 10 decibels, but it's a halving of what the ear hears. So a lot of the literature says that making this modification will make a 9 decibel improvement to this particular family of aircraft. That is significant. Airlines in Europe are retrofitting this. There's at least 10 airlines that are working on it. There is one airline in North America, United, who have said that they will retrofit it to their aircraft. On this, we are making 2 recommendations. The first one, that NAV Canada formally approaches Transport Canada to set an end date, a sunset date, as to when unmodified aircraft can operate within Canadian airspace. These aircraft are fully certified by international standards. They are perfectly safe to operate, but they do make this whining noise. So give the airlines notice that they have 3 years in which to make the modification. The second recommendation is for NAV Canada to work with the GTAA and the local carriers in Toronto that are operating these aircraft to try and persuade them to achieve that modification within 2 years. It does take time to schedule all these aircraft through the hangars, but those are the recommendations to look to try and achieve this in Toronto within 2 years, and for all A320 family aircraft operating in Canada by the end of 2020. So that was about making aircraft quieter. What about keeping them higher so they're quieter on the ground? The higher they are, the less noise they produce, as I've said a few times. Low power, low drag operations. This is about keeping the aircraft as sleek as possible for as long as possible. When the pilots have to start to slow down or add flaps, put down the undercarriage, the wind whistling over those parts of the aircraft makes most of the noise. On arrival, it is the airframe that probably makes more noise than the engines. On departures, it is certainly the engines. So if you can operate it in a way that you're using the lowest power possible and producing the least drag possible, you've got a quiet aircraft. Shown here is one of the options. So if you can do it in low power, if you can also, where's my red dot, showing the continuous descent line here in blue, if you can manage the descent of the aircraft such that they perform an almost constant descent angle, it tends to keep the aircraft higher than the traditional step-down approach. So if you can do it in low power, low drag, you're doing it as quietly as you can, and if you can do it as a continuous descent, you are keeping the aircraft as high as you can. 2 ways of reducing the noise. The recommendation here is that the industry gets together and forms an industry noise management board. Achieving these things takes work between the different stakeholders. So we're recommending that the Noise Management Board is established, made up of NAV Canada, GTAA, the airlines, potentially Transport Canada as well, to work together to develop a code of operation that encourages low power, low drag continuous descent operations. And that guidance, or code of operation, once it is produced, is then communicated to the controllers and to the pilots. And moving beyond that, so once they're aware of the importance of doing this, that NAV Canada actually publishes on a quarterly basis the number of aircraft that are achieving a continuous descent operation, and then sets an annual target for improvement to keep continuously improving the number of aircraft that are doing the continuous descent approach. And that should be reported publicly, as I said, on a quarterly basis, so that you can see how NAV Canada is making improvements and the airlines are making those improvements to achieve this. The second option for keeping aircraft higher is changing the angle at which they approach the airport. At the moment, aircraft approach at 3 degrees. That is the guidance set by ICAO. Aircraft are actually certified to be able to approach the airport slightly steeper than 3 degrees, and a number of airports have done trials of increasing the angle to 3.2 degrees. At 3.2 degrees and 8 nautical miles, or nearly 15 kilometres away from the airport, the aircraft would be 170 foot higher. It's not a lot, I accept, and it has been shown to reduce noise by circa 1 decibel. Some will argue that it's not worth doing because you won't be able to detect 1 decibel, but every little bit can help. To achieve this on a consistent basis does require some changes in the infrastructure and the landing systems and aircraft navigation systems. I'm not going to go into the technical detail, but it could be done now. It can be done more consistently in the future with a change of the landing systems that are coming. And the recommendation we are saying here is for the Industry Noise Management Board to look and see what needs to be done at Toronto Pearson and whether increasing to 3.2 is a viable option and whether it will actually make a difference that is worthwhile to proceed down that route. Another option for keeping aircraft higher and quieter is a change to the way that the operation runs here when 2 arrival runways are in use. There are times a day when the airport is busy and in total they use 3 runways. One of those runways is just for departures, one of them is just for arrivals, and one of them operates a combination of departures and arrivals. So at that point, you can have 2 different arrival streams, shown on the chart here in blue and in green. It's what we call the high-low operation in a simple term, but it's simultaneous parallel arrivals. It is called high-low because the aircraft on one side is kept 1,000 foot higher than the aircraft on the other side. And this is about making sure that the aircraft have sufficient separation, that they never end up pointing at each other at the same height, because obviously we want to run a safe operation. There is new rules coming from ICAO. They're out for consultation with 191 member states of ICAO at the moment, and it is expected that should they go through, and they've been worked on for a while, so we are confident they will be approved, they will come into force November next year. They will allow this high-low operation to be removed or certainly reduced in the first place and work towards removal longer term. They will allow the aircraft on the south side potentially to be up to 1,000 to 1,500 foot higher. That is going to make something in the order of 3 decibel or more than 3 decibel improvement. So again, it's a different set of operating procedures that are coming. The technical detail of it is covered in the report, but the key message to take away from here is that by bringing in the new operation, NAV Canada can operate the airspace in a slightly different manner and can keep the aircraft on the south side higher, and equally the aircraft on the north side won't be required to be at 4,000 foot. They equally can be higher. So there is improvement there. So the recommendation on this one is that NAV Canada consider this new operation and start to think about how it can be implemented here, and working with the carriers to make sure that when it is achievable, when it is part of the international guidance and standards that can be used, that they are ready to move forwards with it as an operating procedure. Providing relief. What we've termed runway alternation, some people will call it noise sharing. As I said at the beginning, in our guiding principles, we've identified a number of options. Only one is shown here on the screen. The report contains multiple diagrams about different ways that you can operate this. Runway alternation is the practice of changing the active runways for short periods of time during the day. It could be for the whole day. A number of airports do it for 3-6 hours within the day. It depends on the traffic. At Toronto, when they've got to run 3 runways for busy times, you can only operate either in the east-west orientation. When you're using 2 runways or 1 runway, there are many other options that you can use. So these are covered, and the recommendation we're making in this area is up there, is that NAV Canada should consult on this recommendation if the current work being led by the GTAA indicates that there is public support and that it is something that the Greater Toronto Area will accept as a means of supporting the growth of the airport. There are other ways of providing relief. The one on the left here is about an operation that is currently used by controllers, but encouraging it to be used more often. So at times when the airport isn't at peak demand, the aircraft coming in from the south, or equally this could be from the north, are given a direct flight path, or what I've termed here a shortcut, to a point where they then complete their base turn and come back on the final approach to the airport. This reduces the distance that they're flying over residential areas, because it is, as you can see, it's less distance over the land. It is an existing route, so these are communities that already get some traffic, and this would reduce the quantity of aircraft flying along the south or the north downwind. There are periods of the day when it is busy, when the downwind has to be used, but there are also periods of the day when this alternative operation could be used to help reduce the quantity of traffic. It will not remove all aircraft off the south downwind, but it will reduce the number. The second option here is about moving the south downwind completely out over the lake. This is a move that would need quite a substantial distance. We've estimated that it's at least 6 kilometres further than, or 6 nautical miles further than it currently is, to put it far enough out over the lake that it doesn't affect the people on the lake shore. There are 2 challenges with this operation. One, with the current technology and the current operation here, the sustained traffic flows could not be kept up. There would be a reduction in capacity. The other one is that where that flight path, or possibly multiple flight paths ringed in red there, would move with different flows of traffic. As I said, the base turn moves up and down. It will hit communities that currently do not have noise. So those will become newly affected communities. So on these 2, we have the one on the left is recommended and the one on the right is not recommended at this stage because, as I said, it's not possible to sustain the capacity, the flow of aircraft that NAV Canada and the airport currently handles, and it also impacts new communities. A further option on providing relief, which we've looked at and discussed, is putting in place multiple flight paths and moving aircraft between them, either on the short term, monthly, every season, every year. Whilst in theory it looks like it can be done, and it potentially can, but each time you move that flight path, you are putting the aircraft over new communities and you are increasing the number of impacted people with aviation noise. We've looked at it and assumed that you're moving the aircraft at least 1 nautical mile, so 2 kilometres away from its existing line, which would give a significant reduction in noise for the people under the previous line, but equally it brings a significant increase in noise for those under the new line. So again, we are not recommending this because it impacts new communities. It also has similar issues as putting the downwind over the lake, that each time it moves, you can't sustain the capacity and the flow of aircraft. There is another method of providing relief, which is called point merge. At the moment, those aircraft approaching the airport either from the east, when you're landing from the east towards the west, or from the west when landing the other direction, what we term straight-in arrivals, currently don't have really anywhere where the controller can slow them down or delay them because they're just on a straight-in path. Where those on the downwind, the controller can let the downwind extend until they're ready to turn the aircraft and merge them in with the other traffic flow and bring them back. This tends to cause at times that straight-in arrivals get the priority. And therefore, by putting in a point merge system, which is a method used at 12 or 15 airports around the world, it's only been used for about the past 6 to 8 years. It's a relatively new development in aviation. Aviation doesn't move that quickly, but this would give the straight-in arrivals a means to delay them, just rebalance the priorities between those coming straight in and those on the downwind, which means that when there is a conflict in who's going first, that potentially the one on the downwind can be turned sooner, stopping the downwind being extended further and impacting more people. The point merge system could be positioned such that it would be much higher, that it will not. It's also where the existing straight-in arrivals come. So it's over an area that already gets some aircraft noise. The point at the bottom of it, at the end of the funnel, would be where the existing flight paths come together and at the same altitude as the existing flight paths. So we don't believe that this changes any of the noise impact from the straight-in arrivals and would give a rebalancing the priorities between the 2 streams and therefore reduce how often the south downwind or the north downwind gets extended over more communities. So to that extent, we are recommending that NAV Canada investigate further and look to the potential for designing in a single point merge system. We have considered a twin point merge system, but we have not been able to find a scheme that is viable. So we are only recommending the single point merge, which then readdresses the balance. Okay, time-based operations. This is where we're looking slightly to the future, or it's existing stroke developing technology. Time-based operations is about trying to manage the timing of aircraft, and rather than using the downwinds or the point merge to build in a bit of delay as the aircraft's coming in, if you know that you've got too many aircraft coming and you can slow them down or even speed one or two up further away from the airport, then you can absorb that delay or get an aircraft that you need in sooner. You can manage it much further away and therefore reduce the quantity of time that that aircraft is in the local area around the airport, therefore reducing the noise that it pushes onto the local communities. The system here that we are talking about is called an arrivals manager, which gets shortened to AMAN. And initially, the AMAN has been used quite close into the airport. They are now pushing it out to an area of about 500 nautical miles away from the airport, and they are managing the flow of aircraft within that to reduce the time that they are then holding either on the downwind or in a point merge or a stack close into the airport. So we believe this will reduce the time that aircraft are close in, and it will also optimise the arrival flow and make it more predictable. As technology moves forwards, we believe, and the industry is moving towards this, of pushing out that distance further and further to the point where eventually flights will be managed to within a few seconds, right the way from their origin to their destination, by knowing the details of all the weather patterns that it's going to cross through en route, all the other traffic it's going to meet. That is some distance away. But this arrivals manager and managing the area within 500 miles of the airport is achievable today and is used at some airports around the world. In Europe, the 25 busiest airports have to implement this by 2024. So the technology is there and it can be done. Because the 500 nautical miles will obviously stretch some way into the US airspace, that element of it could take a while longer to gain acceptance of and work with the FAA and build up that level of cooperation. But that doesn't mean to say that it can't be implemented sooner and used within the Canadian airspace element of this. So again, we are recommending that NAV Canada moves forward and purchases the arrivals manager system and works with their organisation to introduce the process change required to get that used by the controllers and make it a standard part of their operation. Okay, so in summary, first of all, I'd like to take a look back at those complaints that I put up originally. So where are we now? What are we recommending here and how do they affect the complaints? We talked about the complaint that came up most often, that there were too many aircraft, too often, and too loud. We've looked at continuous descent and low power, low drag operations about keeping the aircraft higher and quieter for longer. We've looked at the way that we can reduce the need to keep aircraft at 3,000 foot, i.e. the high-low operation, keep aircraft higher on the south downwind so as they make less noise. Options for putting the shortcut over the lake so as to reduce the number of aircraft at times a day using the downwinds, and then reduce use of the downwinds through future technology such as the arrivals manager, so as you can manage the flow of aircraft beforehand, or the point merge system to reduce how far the downwind is extended. Putting efficiency before noise, we set the strategic objective about looking at whether there is a balance between when noise is prioritised and when the greenhouse gas emissions are prioritised. Using the lake more, again, it's the shortcuts over the lake and the future developments that may negate the need for downwinds. If you can get aircraft in the right sequence, on time, and therefore you know exactly when they're going to arrive and the order they're going to arrive in, you don't need the tactical tool that a downwind gives you of being able to change the order in which aircraft are going to approach the airport for landing. So if you can get the perfect sequence before the aircraft ever get here, you don't need a downwind or a point merge system. So again, that's a future step, and the reason why we are saying an arrivals manager is the first step moving in through this time-based operation system. Too many night flights. Nav Canada is not accountable for the number of night flights, so that we haven't been able to address, although we do talk in the report about trying to manage the very early morning peak from 6:30 and trying to improve that situation on either side of the night. The A320 wine, as I said right at the beginning, if you can make these aircraft quieter, it could have a significant impact, and about setting a date by which all of these aircraft within Canadian airspace should be modified. Nav Canada didn't consult sufficiently. As I said at the beginning, we have looked to what mitigation can go forwards rather than looking at what's happened in the past. But the aviation industry did in Canada publish a communication and consultation protocol which, whilst it's never needed to be used in Toronto yet, it has been used at some of the other airports. And although we've not looked at them in detail, we believe it is a step in the right direction to make sure that communities are communicated with and consulted when there are changes. And finally, on the concentrated flight paths, I sort of said that the concentration had only occurred within 150 metres either side of the centre line, and that wouldn't make an impact on the ground that could be distinguished. And as I said, the analysis behind that and charts are included in the report. So a number of recommendations there that will improve the situation, but we can't solve noise, and we never were going to be able to solve noise totally, but it will improve the situation. So, final summary. The review's been an independent and comprehensive review. As I said, the report is a sizable piece of work. It will take some time to read it and digest it. We have tried to take into consideration everybody's views, be them community views, airline views, the airport, Nav Canada, Transport Canada. We've met with all of you as far as we possibly can. We cannot achieve perfection for everybody, but we've done what we believe we can. We've looked at other airports around the world to see what they're doing and learn from them as to what can be achieved here. The same issue comes up in every airport. Noise causes complaints. The solutions are different at different airports. There's different geography, different communities, different acceptance of noise. So we've looked to see what other airports have been doing and what can be applied here to make the improvement of noise. We've made recommendations, and you've seen the green recommendation stamp on a number of the slides. We've made those where we believe there is a beneficial benefit of reduction of noise and that they are operationally achievable. It doesn't help you, it doesn't help the organisations, and it doesn't help us if we recommend something that can't actually be delivered. So our recommendations, we believe, are operationally achievable. We acknowledge that some of them require lower traffic and that those quieter times of day may erode as the demand for air travel grows, but they are there at the moment and can help have a benefit. And finally, there is a combination, and in the report for each recommendation we've indicated whether we believe it is a short, medium or long-term recommendation to give you an idea as to when the different factors will come in. Some are much easier to achieve than others. Some don't need changes to airspace. They are some things that can be achieved much quicker. Others, such as the time-based operation, that is something where you can make a step fairly soon, but to gain the maximum benefit out of it will take much longer-term area. So that is an overview of the recommendations. As I've said a few times, they are all in the report. There is the full detail behind them in the report. Please read it, and then if you've got questions about what is in the report, as Boo said at the beginning, you can contact us on the Toronto Airspace Review email address.